Hello, Julie here and welcome to my YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me today, and if you're not a subscriber, I just wanted to give you a quick reminder to click that subscribe button. In this video I'm going to create 3 cards, so I don't know what to call these cards. There's 3 cards, they all have yellow on them and they all have flowers on them, so not sure what to say. Something that I did a little different to normal is I've done something on the inside of each of these cards as well as on the outside, so that's something a little bit different for these cards. Another thing that I've used on 2 of the 3 cards is acetate, and also I've used some alcohol inks on acetate on one of the cards. So let's start with this card. It's probably the simplest of all of the cards. I've cut a piece of acetate to 5 inches square. My card is 5 1/4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and I've run it through my Big Shot using this Couture Creations embossing folder. It makes a pattern of daisies. I'm going to use this Woodware stamp. It's called Whimsical Flower Daisy May. I'm going to stamp that onto some white cardstock and then heat emboss it with some black embossing powder. I'm going to wipe my card with my embossing buddy, so that little powder puff thing, so that I don't get any embossing powder where I don't want it. I use my Versamark watermark stamp pad and my superfine detail black embossing powder. This is the first time I've used this stamp, so I will give it a wipe over with a baby wipe and then dry it with a microfiber cloth before I start stamping. I'm not an expert stamper, and I'm going to use my Tim Holtz stamping platform to stamp this. I'm going to probably stamp it a couple of times, so by using the stamping platform I can be sure that I will get the stamp in the same place, even though that's not always guaranteed with me. To colour my flower, I'm going to use these Kaisercraft colour brush tip markers. They're soft, flexible brush tip, 24 colours, watercolour finish effect. So I bought these recently and I thought I'd give them a try on this card. I'm not an expert on colouring, but I'm going to start with the lightest colour for each area. So I'm doing the flower yellow, and then I will highlight that or shade that with a orange, and then I'll use 2 greens on the leaves. I'll use the same technique. I'm putting the yellow, the lightest colour first, and then the darkest colour in the areas that I want it. Once I've got my colour down, I come in with a water brush and just smooth the shading out a little. I use the black marker to colour the spots in the centre of the sunflower. Once I'm happy with the colouring and the look of the flower, I use my scissors and fussy cut the flower out. When I've got my flower cut out, I use a black permanent marker to run around the edge of the cutout so that the white edge is covered. It makes your fussy cutting look a lot neater. For my card base, I'm going to use this pearlised creamy coloured cardstock. I'm going to cut it so that it's 5 1/4 inches by 10 1/2 inches. Score it at 5 1/4 on the 10 1/2 inch length and fold it along the score line to make my 5 1/4 inch square card. Time now to start assembling my card. I've got all my elements. I'm going to use my art glitter glue to attach my flower to my embossed piece of acetate. Because I'm sticking it to acetate, I'm putting a stamping block on top of it just to hold it in place while the glue dries. Next step was to attach my flower to the front of my card. Well, when I started doing that, I looked at it and I thought it looked a bit too simple, so I decided to cut a piece of white cardstock that was 5 inches square and attach that to the card front before I attached the acetate panel with the flower on it. Before I attached the white panel to the card base, I inked around the edge of it and then attached it using the same art glitter glue. For my sentiment, I decided to combine two words from two different stamp sets. One of them is from the Woodware stamp set called A Birthday Moment, and the other one is from a scrapbook.com stamp set. I'm not sure what that one's called. So I've used the Happy from the scrapbook.com stamp set and the Birthday from the Woodware. I'm going to use my powder tool, stamp it with my Whimsical watermark ink, and then heat emboss it with the same black embossing powder that I used on the flower outline. Once the embossing was finished, I trimmed my greetings down to a separate size, so each piece is separate. I inked around the edge of it. I wanted to mount these a bit higher, so I used some chipboard scraps on the back and then attached them to the front of the card using art glitter glue. So as I said, I decided to put something on the inside of each of these cards today. So I'm using the same flower stamp and I'm just stamping on the inside. Oh well, I've cut a panel actually 5 inches square in white, and I'm using my StazOn jet black ink to stamp this stamp onto that 5-inch white cardstock panel. I think I need to re-ink this stamp pad. As a matter of fact, I've done that now, but it comes out pale, which I didn't mind in the end. I didn't want something that was very stark, so the fact that it came out a bit paler is quite good as far as I'm concerned. And I just stamped that to the right hand edge of that white panel. I then attached that to the inside of my card using the same art glitter glue that I used on the rest of the card. So on to card number 2. Lots of stamping on this card, and as I said, I am not a good stamper, and especially with embossing powder I seem to get it everywhere. Anyway, I'm using this daisy stamp and I've cut a piece of yellow cardstock that's 5 inches square. I've put some removable tape on the back and I'm going to position the cardstock on top of the stamp and then close the back of the stamping platform over onto it so that I get the stamp in the middle of, or covering all of that yellow cardstock. Then I'm going to stamp it a couple of times using my Versamark watermark stamp pad and then heat emboss it with that same black embossing powder that I used on the previous card. I'm not too worried about the centre of this panel because I'm going to put another panel over the top of it. I'm mostly concentrating on the outside edge. I'm going to use the same technique to stamp the same stamp onto a piece of white cardstock that I've cut down. This piece of cardstock is 4 1/4 inches square. Now that all my stamping is done and my heat embossing powder is attached, I use my heat tool to melt that powder. I use my reversible tweezers to hold the paper, saves my fingers getting burnt. Time now to colour my flowers. I'm going to use my distress inks for that and a water pen. I'm going to, for the daisies, I'm going to use mustard seed and carved pumpkin. So the mustard seed will be on the outside and the carved pumpkin will be towards the centre. And for the leaves, I'm going to use peeled paint and pine needles. I basically used the same technique that I used on the other card, but this time I'm using a water brush instead of a brush pen. No need to watch this whole process, so I'm going to do most of this colouring off screen. So as I said, I wanted to layer this piece on top of the yellow embossed piece. So I went ahead and cut 3/8 of an inch off of each edge of this pattern, or this embossed paper that I've just coloured. So this panel now measures 4 1/4 inches square. I didn't like the look of those two panels sitting directly on top of each other, so I cut a piece of white cardstock that was 4 1/2 inch square, and I'm going to mat that piece that I coloured onto that white square and then attach that on top of the yellow panel. I used double-sided tape to attach my layers. I've used plain white cardstock to cut a white card base for this. Once again, the card base is 5 1/4 inches square, so I've cut it 5 1/4 inches by 10 1/2 inches, scored at 5 1/4 inches on the 10 1/2 inch side and folded it in halves. Now I'm going to attach my assembled panels, it's got all the layers on it, onto the front of that card. The inside of this card has very little decoration on it. I used one of these strips that I cut off of the painted panel, the front white painted panel, matted that on a piece of the plain yellow cardstock, and then attached that to the inside of the card on the left-hand edge of the bottom section of the card, or where you'd write your personal message. I used a die which says hello. It cuts out the hello and also cuts out the shadow. So I cut the hello from yellow and the shadow from white. I assembled those, and when I put it on the front of my card, I thought that it got lost. So I decided not to use that. I recut the hello in yellow, and I attached that to a piece of white cardstock that is 3 inches by 1 inch, and inked around the edge of that and tried that, and I preferred that, so that's what I went with. I attached a piece of chipboard scrap to the back and then attached that to the front bottom section in the middle of my card. Number 3 card for today was the most time consuming but the most fun. To make my focal point for this card, I'm using some acetate and I'm using alcohol inks. I chose a variety of colours. I'm using the Paper Mill brand, and I'm using Poppy, Rose, Citrus, Turquoise, and a couple of shimmers. One's called Amethyst and one's called Magenta, so they've got some shimmer in them. I'm dropping some of the alcohol inks onto the acetate, and then I'm using this Couture Creations tool to blow the alcohol ink around on the acetate. I found that it worked better if I didn't put so many blobs of colour down at one time, and because I'm not using blending solution with this, the alcohol ink will dry out. It does dry out fairly quickly, so by putting just a few drops down at a time, it gives you more time to work that actual blob of colour. So that's my process. I'm just going to sort of fast forward through this, but it's the same process for all of the colours. When you're using the shimmer ones, you have to really shake them up quite well. They've got a little ball in the bottom that you have to make sure you activate and get moving around so that your shimmer gets mixed in with your colour. I did mix, I think I mixed some, I can't remember what colours it was, but I did get a bit of brown in there at one stage and I wasn't impressed with that, so that was my own fault, mixing purple and red probably, or something like that. Anyway, I will just put a bit of music on in the background and let this play through so that you can see how the colours come together. By mixing various colours, you do get a variety of different shades and different colours actually. So I'll come back to you when I've got all of my colour on my acetate. I used the same technique with the leaf and emerald to make some green to use for my leaves. I set that aside to dry, and when it was dry I wanted to stamp some flowers and leaves out onto my acetate. Now, recently I went to a scrapbooking retreat that Natalie May ran here in Adelaide, and one of the things that was in our goodie bag was this alcohol ink, Stays in Place ink pad. When Nat demonstrated it, it looked great. It was beautiful, black, crisp, lovely. When I used it, not so much. But anyway, what I did was I primed the pad like it says in the instructions, so you have to add the ink to the pad. It's a foam pad, and the ink dries out quite quickly, so you have to re-ink this every time you use it. This one is called Jet Black, and I'm pretty sure that that's what she was using when she did her demo, but mine certainly was not as nice, crisp, black as hers was, so then perhaps there's another colour. But anyway, I inked up my pad and got it nice and juicy. As a matter of fact, I think I might have over-juiced it because there was some running down the side, but I wanted to make sure that I got a nice image. That didn't work. But I'm going to take this Woodware stamp of a flower. It's called Mini Scented Bloom. I'm going to use that to stamp my flowers, and I have a couple of petals from a heartfelt creation stamp called Botanical Rose. I'm going to use the Botanical Rose leaves to stamp on the green acetate and the flower on the multicolour. I am going to stamp 3 flowers and an assortment of leaves. I think I cut about 6 or 8 leaves. As I said, I stamped with the ink pad and it was barely visible. I don't know whether my alcohol inks are too bright or what, but it was hard to see. I did the same thing with the leaves, stamping onto the green acetate, which is not as dark, like the alcohol ink is not as dark, but even still the black was fairly hard to see on the acetate. Off screen I fussy cut my flowers. I actually drew around the edges of them with a permanent marker to help them stand out a bit better. I do have to say though that I love the colour, the alcohol inks on the acetate. Just love it. So I went ahead and created a yellow card base, the same way I've made the others, so 5 1/4 inches square. I also cut a piece of white cardstock that is 5 inches square, another piece of yellow cardstock that is 4 1/4 inches square, and another piece of white cardstock that is 4 inches square. I took the 2 pieces of white cardstock to my Big Shot and ran it through with this Cutterbee embossing folder. It's just a dot, so it just puts spots over the whole area. Time to start attaching the panels to the front of my cardstock. I inked around the edge of all of the papers, or all of the cardstock, and attached the large white square of cardstock to the card base. Then I attached the small white cardstock to the small piece of yellow cardstock, and then I attached some chipboard scraps to the back of the yellow cardstock. Time now to play around with the placement of my flowers on my card front. This is just the panel. I'm keeping that separate at the moment. Once I decide where I'm going to place each of those flowers, I just add a little bit of art glitter glue to the centre of each flower and stick it down on the panel. I think in hindsight I probably should have just went with 2 flowers on this. I think it looks a bit crowded, and you can't really make head nor tail of each of those flowers. They all sort of blend into one. So if I was going to do this again, I'd probably only use 2 flowers on the front. Once I had my flowers and leaves attached to the front panel, I then attached that panel to the front of my card. For the inside of the card, I cut a piece of white cardstock so that it was 5 inches by 3 1/4, inked the edges of that, and attached that in the centre of the inside panel. Then I cut 2 strips of white cardstock 5 5/8 inches long and wide, and a strip of transparency that was 5 inches by 1/2 inch, and attached those to the white cardstock using glue. I have to say that you can't really see the glue. You can't see the glue through the transparency or through the alcohol ink, so that's a good benefit. And then I attached the transparency onto the white strip, and then attached one of those strips at the top and one at the bottom, above and below that white panel that I attached. So that's how I decorated the inside for this card. I have to say I haven't put any greeting or anything on this card, nothing on the inside, because I don't really know what I'm going to use it for, so I'm going to wait until I have an occasion and then I will put a sentiment on it. To finish my third card off, I added some crystal gems to the centre of the flowers. These gems are about probably 3/8 of an inch in diameter, so they're a yellow colour, and I've just used a dab of glue to centre them in each flower. So they're my 3 cards for today. I hope you've enjoyed watching my video. If you're not already a subscriber, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel, and if you click the bell next to the subscribe button and select all, you'll be notified each time I upload a new video. Well, once again, thank you for being here with me today. I hope you've enjoyed my video. Thumbs up, comment, whatever you like. I'd love to hear from you, and thank you once again. I hope you can join me for my next video.